Test. Okay, we're live. Hey everyone who's just watching. Just gonna wait for a couple more before we get started. Gonna be another more like lean stream, but we'll see. Anyway, a lot of people had a backlash to my video, which was just an archive of my stream that was edited. So I wanted to go over some of the criticisms because it seems like this whole conflict has turned a bunch of supposed leftists into a bunch of warmongers. People saying, I think I saw a poll the other day that 72% of Americans want NATO troops to go into Ukraine and fight Russia. And I'm just like, not even have we not learned anything from Iraq. It's like, are you guys just fucking insane or something? Like, when's the last time we had a conflict between two nuclear powers? It was like, I don't know. Even the Korean War, like the Soviets were involved, but they didn't fight properly. Some of the Air Force did, and that's about it. Hi, Singularity. How's it going? Hey, Richard. Hey, Tito. Brown Eyes. Cameron. Dean. Thanks for joining. No, Konstantinos. I'm not saying the US will do that, but I'm saying people making the arguments they should do that are like fucking crazy. Like I cannot even believe what I'm reading. I cannot even believe the arguments I'm getting into with people that I don't like NATO and I'm against NATO because of the US influence. And like I even made the point in the video, I will accept an argument based on Russia's actions over the last like 10 years of a European defense force against Russia, right? I accept that argument. I don't accept the argument that NATO in its current iteration with the US pulling all the strings is a good thing. Because the funny thing is as well, it's obviously like a bunch of Americans who don't even understand European politics talking about like, oh yeah, like let's just expand NATO, make NATO massive. The problem is, and here's the point, because obviously a lot of Americans don't even know their own history. There used to be an organization in the 1960s called like SEATO or SATO, right? It was basically a NATO for Asia. You guys probably have not even heard of this because it's became so irrelevant. It was like the Philippines, the US, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, America, South Vietnam, and basically, what did the Americans do with that organization? Well, they made most of the member countries fight in the Vietnam War. Most importantly, they made Australia and New Zealand go fight in the Vietnam War. So this is the problem with NATO, is that because of the American influence, NATO is not inherently a defensive alliance. And this is the point I was trying to make to everyone in the last video, and everyone getting really like, not really about her. I only lost like 90 subs or something, so it's not like the worst thing in the world. But it's the problem is NATO invaded Iraq, NATO invaded Afghanistan, NATO toppled Gaddafi, right? And in a vacuum, you'd be like, oh yeah, Gaddafi's a bad guy. Yeah, but it completely destroyed Libya. What NATO does with the US leading it is they make the other countries participate in American imperialist wars so America will protect them. So why did Denmark fight in Iraq and Afghanistan? Are you guys going to seriously make the argument to me that it's in Denmark's best interests to go overthrow Saddam Hussein and fight the Taliban? Is that in Denmark's best interest? As a defensive alliance against Russia, and as a country that wants to be defended against Russia, which is totally fine, does invading Iraq and Afghanistan achieve more stability for them? And that's the problem. Norway bombed Gaddafi and participated in all those airstrikes. That's the problem. If NATO, in my mind, I don't have as much of a problem with it if you get rid of the US influence, because, and people also saying, well, what about Russia? It's like Russia can't even easily defeat Ukraine, and you're going to have France, Britain, which both have nuclear weapons, and you're going to have Germany and all these other countries which have like fairly good militaries, but in terms of the manpower, That's more than enough to at least achieve a balance of power with Russia. And I would argue that Russia could not defeat NATO without the US. Like, even if the US was not involved, I don't think Russia could defeat them in a conventional war, right? So, what NATO essentially acts as for the US, and I've actually talked to people who used to work in the military, including people I know who've done like NATO operations, is they use this as an excuse for stuff. And that's my problem with it. I don't understand how a supposed American leftists, or even just leftists in general, can't understand my point that if NATO is meant, even if you think NATO should still exist today after the fall of the Soviet Union, are you seriously going to make the argument to me NATO should be overthrowing countries in the Middle East? How is an alliance that's set up to stop Russian aggression? How is that achieving its purpose by doing wars for oil in the Middle East on behalf of the US? And that's the problem. That's like Seato. Seato was the same. Seato failed, obviously, because it doesn't exist anymore. It's just like totally ridiculous. And that's the thing. If Ukraine's not gonna probably, okay, unless it has like a very significant victory. I can't see Ukraine joining NATO. I can see it joining the EU, which would be good. But that's the problem. If the problem with the NATO having the US is essentially NATO acts as mercenaries for the US, and I don't understand how people cannot understand my point, even if you disagree with it. I don't understand the counter argument to, well, NATO had to invade Iraq, NATO had to invade Afghanistan when it was the Americans who wanted to do that. It's not Denmark and Norway. And as someone who did a history degree in the Vietnam War, here's what the Americans do. So take, for example, South Korea. So obviously, South Korea has a massive contingent of American armed forces in it, right? So in 1971, Richard Nixon started this policy of Vietnamization, which means he would transfer the main fighting on the ground in Vietnam to the South Vietnamese and pull American forces out. Now, he had meetings with the president of South Korea, and he said, "You're going to increase your troop levels in Vietnam, or we're going to take our troops out of South Korea." And this was at a time when North Korea actually wanted to invade again. Like you can read documents where Kim Il Sung is asking Mao, like, "Can I invade? Like, I want to do it now. Like, America does not have the stomach for another war." This is just after the Vietnam War ended, right? So Nixon was threatening the South Koreans. He's like, "If you don't put more forces in Vietnam, we're pulling out." And South Korea became the second biggest foreign force that fought in the Vietnam War. And they were, even the local Vietnamese on the side of the Americans hated them because they were only acting as mercenaries. They didn't give a shit about the conflict. They just there to fulfill their obligations to the US, right? That this is just the South Korea American relationship, and it's a similar thing with Denmark and Norway and a lot of these countries who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, who obviously have no interest in doing that apart from satisfying US imperialism and maintaining their position within US imperialism, right? So that's my thing. If you want to have a European defensive alliance against Russia, make it headed by the European Union and not by the Americans. And I think that's better for world peace in general. I think it's better for this, what I was arguing in the other video, for this multipolar world. Like, I want a world, if I have to have a world which is dominated by superpowers, I want more of them rather than less of them. I don't want the US and its lackeys in NATO versus China. I want the US versus, or like competing at least with the European Union, with China, possibly with countries like Brazil and India forming a bloc as well, with Russia potentially, although that seems like it's not going to happen now. That's the world I want. I don't want US, NATO, basically the European Union, or with the military alliance being controlled by the Americans essentially in many ways, because they fund it the most, they have the biggest military in it. I think that just it undermines the purpose, especially, right, for example, I was arguing in the other video, NATO has inherently, because of, NATO shouldn't exist past the Cold War, right? But obviously we've seen with Russia's actions and like Putin kind of wanting this like imperial Russia, everything like that. We've seen that like there is a legit argument to be made for a European defense force, right? And I don't understand how anyone can argue that the European Union plus the UK isn't enough to deter Russian aggression. Two nuclear powers, two members of the UN Security Council in France and the UK. France has a really good military, like army. Britain has a really good navy and air force, and then you have all the other countries to like make up the other ones. And Ukraine are even like putting up a good fight. Ukraine don't even have as good a military as a lot of the NATO members, right? So if you have that on top of the UK and France, I don't see why you even need the Americans there unless you just want like total domination. But that it's not in a vacuum, is it? So we can say like you can line up the forces against each other and say like America, UK, France, all of Europe basically versus Russia, and like, oh, that's how you contain Russian aggression or something like that. But then you undermine it where it's like, well, NATO's reputation is in the shitter because it overthrows different countries in the Middle East for American imperialism. So let's get rid of that. Let's stop wasting forces on America's imperial wars, which aren't even in Europe, and concentrate them on a European defense force. It's like with me personally, I've always said if I was in charge of the UK, I would reform the military into a British defense force rather than a UK military that goes over the world participating in Western imperialism. Because if you're all about defense, then make it about defense and not attacking other countries. That's the main problem with that stuff. And the same with Seato back in the 60s. It's like if this is about defense, then why is the US pulling in basically all the members to go fight in Vietnam? And it's the same thing. So yeah, it's not going to happen. Basically, I'm not delusional. I don't think the US are leaving NATO anytime soon. But if people seriously think as a leftist who opposes capitalism and imperialism, you think I'm going to like the Americans, the biggest empire in the world, the worst country on earth, in my opinion. You think I'm going to like them heading a military organization which, as one of its goals, is apparently to defend Europe, but an ulterior motive it has is to just work the Americans and do what they want, which they often do. And you see with things like the Iraq War, you have a lot of NATO countries that did go along with it, but you have other NATO countries who could say no, saying no. Like France said, we're not doing this, right? Germany said, we're not going to war in Iraq. Where Britain was like, yeah, we want to do this. And then you have countries like Denmark, Spain, which did do it as well. But you see there, when these countries don't want to go along with it, they won't. But that only really appeals to the British and the French, the French and the Germans, or maybe the British. They can say no if they want to. But the other countries don't have much of a choice because they're like closer to Russia's border. They rely more on American forces, Americans' arms sales, everything like that. So they need Americans to help them out, and that's the problem with NATO. So that's my main response to the criticism I was getting in the other video. If you're a leftist anti-capitalist, literally, I don't know how you see wars in Iraq headed by the Americans who drag in the NATO allies and be like, yeah, I think that's a good thing. NATO's a great thing with the US in it. I can't understand the argument there. US is worse than Russia. Yeah, the thing is, people, I will die on this hill all day. US is literally one of the worst countries to exist it is the worst country to exist in past the Second World War, and anyone who thinks like China or Russia are worse, it is just not like accepting all the basic facts. For example, like Russia is clearly a bad country, right? Russia is like this capitalist oligarchical like hellhole. I think the UK and the US are both headed in that direction, and I'm really scared in them becoming dictatorships like Russia, which I think they will be. But the problem is you've got to weigh up who has the most outside influence in the world and who has the most damaging outside influence in the world, right? So Russia right now, what they're doing is like absolutely horrendous, right? Massive body counts, killing civilians. They literally do not give a shit. And the way Russians often conduct war, like in Syria as well, they just don't give a shit about civilian casualties. Often they target civilians in a massive way, right? Reminiscent of what the US used to do. But that's the problem, right? The US controls the global economy, and sanctions against poor countries. Like think of what the US, and it's the hypocrisy as well, right? So Saudi Arabia does a genocide in Yemen. Israel ethnically cleanses Palestine, and then the US puts sanctions on Cuba for what? The US put sanctions on Nicaragua for buying Russian weapons, but they don't put sanctions on India, who buy nearly all their weapons from Russia. I just read an article the other day. They were talking about putting sanctions on India for doing this, and then they decided not to do it because that's the US system as a whole. It's hypocritical. Where like, yes, I totally recognize Russia is like a monstrous country. It's like this. It's like the US is one capitalist dystopia, and Russia is like the other side of the coin, where it's also like this really authoritarian state where it's so visible that the wealth is so concentrated. So yeah, I totally recognize that. But then you think about Iraq, Afghanistan, African imperialism, drone strikes, IMF debt traps, killing African revolutionaries who want to nationalize industries, literally just for oil and just for resources. The thing is, I am under no illusions that Russia would do this if it could. Russia can't do this. The US does do it, and that's the thing people need to make. Because I know a lot of people can't seem to understand nuance. If you're making the argument that like Russia would do that or China would do that, that's completely different. The fact of the matter is, right now they don't do that. So what am I meant to say? Like, well, Russia has the potential to be worse. China has the potential to be worse, but because the US actually is worse, and you can trick yourself and being like, domestically, the US is better than Russia. Okay, fair enough. But at the same time, its foreign policy is more far-reaching. It's literally all over the globe. Russia does not have military bases all over the globe. Russia barely like you think of like Middle Eastern imperialism. What's Russia involved in? Okay, Syria in a massive way, and then what, like kind of friendly with Iran, and that's it. Where the US is like literally props up Saudi Arabian genocide, props up Israeli ethnic cleansing, does, and it always covers their back in the UN. Your people are mad about like China not condemning Russia. The US let Israel get away with all these war crimes, and Saudi Arabia time and again. They always veto sanctions and everything against them because they are like US proxies, and the US props them up, and that's on top of the US's own imperialism. So I don't know how anyone's going to come to me and say like, oh well, Russia is worse. In like the really, if your brain is like literally the last week, then yeah, Russia is worse. Russia has killed probably more people than the US in the last like 2 weeks or something. But if you're taking it as the last like 70 years, the last 20 years, the last 30 years, there is no debate. And you got to question if you're even a leftist if you think that the US isn't the worst country on earth, because it combines all of them. So the problem is, China is an economic powerhouse. Russia is a military one, mainly because it's nuclear arsenal as well. America is both, and it has the most power. It like everything in your life in terms of the economy, especially within a Western nation, is literally dictated by Americans, pretty much. And Americans designed this system of global capitalism after the Second World War, IMF, World Bank. And the thing is, you're thinking about Russia right now. Russia was destroyed by the American economic reforms in the 1990s, right? Putin's Russia is a result of American economic policy through the IMF. And like, I don't know how anyone can argue that, as monstrous as Russia are right now, if we take a broad overview, which is I always try and do as someone who like, loves my history and stuff, you cannot argue with me that Russia has a more negative impact on the world than the United States. Like, what is your argument there? Yeah, Russia kills a lot of people in Syria and Ukraine. Russia killed a lot of people, in Afghanistan in the 1980s. But even with all that, like Americans literally did a genocide in Vietnam, then makes a bunch of movies crying about how it made their soldiers feel. They poisoned the whole land. They completely like wiped like whole generations off the map. And then they like paved the way for like the Khmer Rouge, did more genocide in Laos and stuff like that. And people want to make the argument. And the thing is, not only did they do a genocide in Vietnam, they placed an embargo on it for 20 years afterwards, so it could hardly rebuild properly. And people want to make an argument that like Russia and China are like worse or something. Like the US does this all the time. Look at what they're doing in Afghanistan right now. They've frozen all the bank accounts. They've frozen all the money. So those people are gonna die. For what? They're gonna die because the US spent like trillions of dollars building up that state. The same people who lived in the US backed Afghanistan still live there now, and what, you're making sure all of them starve to death? That's the type of thing you don't talk about. Yeah, Western media, it's very like explicit, isn't it? Like the Russians roll in, they start bombing apartments, they start killing civilians, and it's awful. And it's like, I'm watching that footage, it feels like a fucking nightmare. But the problem is we focus so much on that. Like imagine if when Israel invaded Gaza in 2014, we had coverage like we have now of Ukraine. Imagine if when like, and it's just like, I'm gonna read my tweet in a second because I'm getting like so radicalized with this shit, because it just makes you see so clearly in the world how hypocritical everyone is, how there's a massive double standard. You are literally allowed to go to Ukraine now and fight Russia. You're allowed to fund the Ukrainian military. You're allowed to buy these militias weapons. If you tried to do that with Palestine, you'd be thrown in prison and put on like some terror watch list for the rest of your life. And I'm going to get into my tweet thread because I'm getting heated now. I'm going to read some comments quick before I get into this a bit more. Sorry. All right. Sorry, I'm just reading some stuff. Okay, so I tweeted this today, and this is what's getting me really heated, right? So I know, like a lot of Americans who give me backlash. I know, like, you don't really give a shit about like European politics at all, or even like Europe. Like, the thing is, the war in Ukraine affects Europeans way more than it's ever going to affect you, right? And it's not just, it's like, you know. Sorry, okay. All right, so the whole Ukraine situation is radicalizing as hell. We spent over 10 years watching North African, Middle Eastern refugees being killed by xenophobic, anti refugee policies, children washing up dead on beaches, refugees being gassed and beaten up by European border police, whole families drowning in like dinghy crossings across the Mediterranean or the British Channel, being told again and again that there is no room for these refugees. But like we've always known, there is room. Europeans are removing all red tape to let thousands of Ukrainians in, which is great. But why the hell did we have to watch so many refugees die? It's not even just the refugee stuff. Jeremy Corbyn is labelled a terrorist sympathiser for helping the Northern Ireland peace process. He never even supported the IRA during the war against the UK's occupation, but now apparently we are all allowed to support, fund, and even go and fight occupation in Ukraine. If you support BDS, you're called an anti-Semite, but now the whole world is boycotting Russia. If you support Palestine, you're an anti-Semite, but now buying weapons that may end up in the hands of Nazis. I'm going to get back to that point a bit more with the Azov battalion dipping bullets in pig fat, and then the Ukrainian National Guard tweeting that out in English like it's something good. So it literally just exposes the ruling class as a bunch of insane racists, liars, and hypocrites who do not value the life of anyone who doesn't seem Western, because now fighting, funding, and supporting anti-occupation movements is actually good, apparently. So by the new logic of the world, go buy arms for Palestinians, go join them in their fight if you want. There is no more ambiguity about the IRA. Azov now gets a pass, so does Hamas. Accept all refugees, boycott all countries that occupy others, because I'm sure that the ruling class want to be consistent, set a precedent where citizens support, fight, and fund and fight occupation wherever it rears its head, from Native American movements in Canada and the US to Kashmir, Palestine, and Kurdistan and Ireland. And of course, any concerns about extremist elements should be dismissed. Again, just so depressing, the blatant hypocrisy of the world is on full on display right now. And that's the thing that's like so radicalizing about this shit. It's like Vosh and Lance from the Serfs, people were saying online like Destiny that they were literally funding Hamas. Like they did fundraisers for like Palestinian charities, Vosh and Lance, and people were saying they were funding Hamas, right? But now I've seen like Patreons where you can buy weapons, and here's, you know, potentially where you're like Vosh and Lance's money wasn't going to end up in the hands of Hamas, right? And then I'm not even going to show you this to you because it might be my Twitter banned, but basically there's a video that the Ukrainian National Guard tweeted out, and it's of Azov soldiers dipping their bullets in pig fat before going to fight Chechens. So if you guys don't know, Chechens are Muslims, right? Obviously, Muslims do not eat pork, pig, and stuff like that. So it's a massive insult if you're going to shoot bullets at them to like dip in pig fat. And of course, like Ukraine should defend themselves, but why are you adding like the really racist element of dipping your bullet in pig fat? And they were calling them orcs as well, right? So that's the problem I have with all this stuff, right? Because it's a double standard. Imagine if there was, well, we don't need to imagine. Hamas exists, and think of how Hamas are depicted as all Palestinians compared to Azov, right? Azov is a pretty small militia, but it's part of the Ukrainian National Guard, right? So imagine if the Western media seriously accepted, and I know like the tankies all saying this, but let's say, for example, CNN says, well, the National Guard is all full of Nazis because look at this video, right? Now, that wouldn't be true, but that is what they do with Palestinians. They're like, well, Hamas have weapons and fight back, therefore all Palestinians actually like Hamas, because that's not true in the slightest. And there was actually a war between the PLO and Hamas over control of Gaza about 15 years ago, or like 17 years ago. But that's the way the media frames it, is like, if you support Ukraine unequivocally, that's a good thing. If you support Palestine unequivocally, well, you must be some sort of anti-Semite, despite the fact them both being like fighting against oppression. And that's the thing that's annoying. Like, I totally support, as obviously someone with an Irish background as well, I totally support Ukrainians fighting back against Russia, right? I'm not going to be like getting really excited when they kill Russian soldiers, but I accept it's a necessity, and that Ukraine right now is a better place to live than Russia. It's a more free place to live in Russia. I totally support either there be like civilians or people in the military fighting back against the Russians to preserve like their independence, right? But I'm saying this to you, I'm not going to start simping for the Ukrainian government in the same way I wouldn't start simping for the British government and Boris Johnson if Britain was invaded. But the problem is like I was saying, if you're gonna have this view in the world that resisting occupation is a really good thing and it's a really moral thing, then why don't we apply it to everyone? So Yemen and the Saudis, well, the Yemenis are good then, aren't they? Palestinians versus the Israelis. Well, according to this new media framing, I should always support the Palestinians. And actually, if an Israeli settler comes to evict a Palestinian, then it would only be right for me to either go over there and fight with him to preserve his home, or to fund him, and it would only be right of me morally to support him picking up a gun and defending himself. And the same way we've seen with the Canadian police and the Native Americans recently, if some of those Native Americans thought that to defend themselves they should pick up weapons and fight the Canadian police, or in America like the National Guard or like oil companies, then I should support that. Where's the GoFundMe page? Can you link me to that? Can I please fund these revolutionary movements against occupation? The same way now, like, okay, well, we're all admitting now with the Russian occupation of Ukraine being awful, then let's be consistent. Northern Ireland should not exist then. If we're going to say, like, if annexing eastern Ukraine is illegal and immoral, then Northern Ireland should not exist anymore, because that is British occupation of Ireland. So that's why it's so like I want to smash my head through a fucking wall, because it's like I'm watching the media get so excited about resistance to occupation while at the same time 1 year ago they were demonizing everyone who supported the Palestinians. And that's just like, I can't even express how frustrating that is as someone, because it's like it's not even the demonization. If you try and support Palestine the way people are supporting Ukraine, you will go to prison. I'm not joking. You'll be go to prison and you'll be put on a terror watch list. And that's why it's so frustrating. It's clearly because there's like an agenda. Obviously, like, you know, there's an agenda there because Russia is a big national security threat for all these European countries. So it does them a lot of good to even get Europeans to go fight the Russians, because, you know, if the Russians suffer a big defeat in Ukraine, that's good for Europe, and it's good for the European nations. But like even people who went to fight ISIS with the Kurds have gone to prison. So like even fighting ISIS with secular Muslims, you go to prison for. But now I saw the UK Foreign Secretary saying any British person who wants to go fight Russia, then go ahead. You're allowed to do that. So okay, it's illegal to fight ISIS in the Middle East, but it's legal to go fight Ukraine. Either there's one rule, or you know, there's one rule for everything, or there's like, you know, it's all illegal, right? It's either all legal or it's all illegal. And obviously there's probably like a limit of like, you know, don't go fight for some terrorist, you know, Islamic extremist group or something like that. But at the same time, you cannot start encouraging people to travel to combat zones to fight, and then when there's other ones which literally have the same framing of fights against colonialization, occupation, you're getting really mad about. So it's just like, I don't know how you guys like feel about this, but it's just like so fucking enraging. And the refugee stuff is, of course, like, if any of you are European, I think a few of you might be because I'm streaming earlier. If any of you are European, you will know how infuriating it's been. Like, I used to, for my first job, I used to cover like asylum seekers and stuff. Like wrote articles about the immigration process and the asylum seeking process, and the British one is like notoriously brutal. We've literally been deploying the navy to stop dinghies of migrants, even unbind frame of refugees from Calais coming here, and just like whole families like drowning in the English Channel. Obviously, you've seen the stuff with Italy, like Lauren Southern like shooting flare guns at like boats carrying refugees. Um, that's been going on for like 10 years, right? And all these countries like Poland, all these other ones been saying no room left. You're gonna destroy our culture, all this fucking shit. And then you've even seen here, Ukrainian border guards have been stopping Indians and Nigerian students from leaving, and you've seen Polish border guards and other European nations not allowing non-white refugees in, and that's like I was saying in the other tweet, you're not going to get me being a nationalist for Ukraine or Poland or anything just because it's under threat. Like, I support Ukraine's right to fight and defend itself. You're not going to get me to simp for the Ukrainian government. It's like I was saying, like, I'm not going to simp for the British government who like enact monstrous policies and all these different problems they have, because at the end of the day, as someone who's leftist, I don't particularly like governments. I don't like all these national institutions that inherently like harm us through like capitalism or like xenophobia. So the fact that like Europeans could always accept these refugees but chose not to is the most maddening thing. And how many refugees have been like thrown into like horrible poverty, died, have to gone back to the conflict zone, or like in Libya being sold into slavery and stuff like that. It's just so like it's so like radicalizing when you just see it in front of you, because the thing is, as like a left wing person, you always know it. Like you know that they were treating Middle Eastern and North African refugees different to how they would treat refugees from other countries. Like, you knew that, but you never had it like confirmed so visually. Like, and that's what the post and the video is, because I'm not gonna. That's a funny thing I'm gonna show you later. But like all this racism in the media talking about, well, this is Europe, like it's blonde haired and blue eyed children. It's not like those Iraqis. And then you have like stuff like this guy who said this isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized European city. And like, it's just so mask off racism. Not to mention, Iraq is literally like the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia, cities from Mesopotamia are 10,000 years old. Baghdad used to be like this center of learning. Like, they used to have this absolutely massive library, like the Library of Alexandria. Arabs in Baghdad translated all the Greek works and then let Europeans translate them back into Latin and stuff later on, or translate them into Latin. Literally, the only reason so many of us know about Greek stuff today is because Arabs in Iraq translated them all and saved them. And we're saying here, like, Ukraine is so civilized, and Iraq backwards savages. Not like it's the oldest fucking place in the entire world, pretty much. Oh god, like this just gets me. It's just so. I can't even. I get like lost for words, because what do you even do? Like, that's the problem. Like, it's the hopelessness. It's like, this is how racist our world is. Is that when something bad happens to white people, it's like the worst thing that's ever happened ever. But when like people who aren't white are constantly getting killed, either by our countries, like, and I was saying this as well. This is what makes me uncomfortable about the nationalism for Ukraine. Like, I'm never going to put a Ukrainian flag in my name, because the problem is, right, if Israel invades Iran tomorrow, how many of you are putting Iranian flags in your bios or in your names? How many of you writing "Glory to Iran"? Like, how many of you are doing that? I don't think many of you are doing that. And why aren't you doing that? Because do you guys know so much about the Ukrainian government? Do you know so much about Ukrainian politics that you feel perfectly comfortable with some sort of nationalism towards Ukraine itself? Well, you probably don't know much about Ukraine. I'd wager most people don't know much about Ukraine, but you're still putting like glory to, and what is even this shit, like glory to Ukraine? That's just like a really fash way of even saying, like, stand with Ukraine, yeah, that's fine. Ukraine like should resist, that's fine. Glory to Ukraine, I don't know. But the thing is, I thought leftists were meant to be against nationalism. So blind loyalty to like this country, I just don't understand. Like, where is the nuance that like you can support people's right to fight against occupation and colonialism, which I do, without going on like a mad simping spree for the country's president and for their soldiers and for their nation and stuff like that? Because I guarantee there's many countries, like, if Iraq got invaded, and it say like Saddam Hussein was still the leader, and then the US invaded Iraq tomorrow or something, you wouldn't be like, I stand glory to Iraq, or like I said, glory to Iran. If China invades, if China invades India, I can imagine people doing that. If India invaded China, I can't imagine people doing that either. It's all like you got to think about in terms of this geopolitical things. What would you be comfortable in saying in certain things? And like, oh, that Ukraine's a democracy. Okay, let's take like another example then. Let's say, all right, let's say Iran invaded Israel. Maybe you're gonna be tweeting like glory to Israel and shit like that. I highly doubt it. I would say glory to Iraq and Iran too. All right, fair enough. If you're tweeting glory to Ukraine and you would tweet glory to Iraq, then then that's okay. You don't want people to side with Iran. No, that's not my point. I don't want people to feel. I want people to feel bad for the people being invaded and occupied. I don't want people's critical thing. Like, are you gonna be simping for the Ayatollah like people are simping for Zelensky? Like, that's what my point is. You know you don't like it, the Iranian government, right? It doesn't mean you support the invasion of Iran by Israel. And like for me, I know I don't like the Ukrainian government, so I'm not going to start simping for the Ukrainian government, but I support the Ukrainian people's right to defend themselves against Russia. That's my point is, you would support the right of Iran to defend itself. Doesn't mean I'm going to start being like, I love the Iran Revolutionary Guard and the Ayatollah, like what amazing people they are and stuff. I'm not going to do that. The same way, if Britain was invaded by Russia, I'm gonna be like, Boris Johnson, fucking hero, the Tory government, I love them so much, like total heroes and stuff like that. I'll be like, yeah, the British people should defend themselves. I support Britain defending itself. Like Britain is this like vague notion of a country, not like I literally support the government. Glory to Britain and Boris Johnson. Glory to North Korea. So I'm reading some stuff. Yeah, or someone saying suddenly Slavs are considered European. Yeah, exactly. Most people don't even consider Slavs like European. Some don't even consider them white. Yeah, it sounds very fashy. The glory to Ukraine thing. How much do I know about Ukraine? Well, I know more than like not like I said in my thing. I'm not an expert on Ukraine, but I was covering this stuff like 2 years ago before it all broke out, and I used to write about it for my paper at uni. So I've been covering Ukraine, Russia for ages. I know way more about Russia than I do about Ukraine. Sorry, I'm just reading some comments. Sorry, someone sent me a super chat. Sanji, thanks so much. For the people bitching and crying about Cav's takes, he's not supporting Russia. This is why Vosh is pretty much blocked by most of the left. Yeah, the thing is, that's why it's so. That's why I get so frustrated when I not that I get frustrated. Like some people were making some good points, pushing back against what I said, and I appreciate it. I'm trying to think of a good one that I was kind of like considering myself. I think it was I think someone was arguing more about the European Defence Force thing, and he convinced me more of that being a good thing because in my video, I was saying that like I could get on board with that a lot more than NATO, but he convinced me a bit more. So I am happy to like back down on some stuff, but people saying that I support Russia is just the craziest shit. Like that how like I hope a lot of people who've been saying who've said that to me, like I support Russia. I hope they're young kids or like under 20 years old or something, because the belief that you cannot criticize or even have nuance in a time of war, like you've got to bang the war drums and just be like, I'm all in for Ukraine, like I love Ukraine, glory to Ukraine, kill those Russian fascists, right? You just it's someone who like hates, and that's the thing. I think some people need to read more about the realities of war. Like, it says it's like a basic bit suggestion, but you guys might have heard of him as Americans. Tim O'Brien fought in Vietnam, and he was really, really close to dodging the draft. Like, he literally got a bus to the border with Canada, and he was going to dodge a draft, but he didn't at the end of the day because he felt like a lot of guilt because a lot of people he knew had gone and stuff. So he goes to Vietnam, and the way he writes about his experience there is so fucking traumatic. Like he does it, it's so personal, and his fears are so personal. Like and the senselessness of the war. If you read stuff like that, you're just like, I do not want war. Like I that's my main thing. I do not want war. I'm not going to celebrate like killing in war. Like I've seen people tweet like the sunflower emojis because that woman said to the Russian invader like, "Oh, take these sunflower seeds so when you die something good comes of it, basically because sunflowers will grow." But I'm seeing people like confirmed 3,500 Russians dead. Sunflower, sunflower, sunflower. Okay, so we're just celebrating like death. Like the thing is, I at the same time, I recognize the reality of the situation. I support Ukraine's like defense, and I know that involves killing, and it's going to involve like horrible acts of killing. I'm sure a lot of those soldiers are going to be pretty traumatized by the stuff they've seen, but it's necessary to do that, right? I'm not going to fucking celebrate that though. I'm not going to celebrate. And you've seen like those videos of those Russian soldiers crying, like a lot of them are like 19 years old and stuff. And they live in this horrible dictatorship where I'm sure the military, just like the US military, gives them more benefits than they get in a normal society. So I'm not going to celebrate the deaths of people. I want the conflict to resolve as quick as possible. And I want Ukraine to come out of it on top. Doesn't mean I'm celebrating and reveling in the carnage of every soldier who's fighting in that war. And sorry, what was my point? Yeah, the Tim O'Brien book is really crazy because it's like he really gets into the mind of someone who like has more OCD thoughts. He talks about walking around Vietnam and constantly thinking he's going to step on a landmine because so many people in his unit stepped on landmines. And he says like you're constantly thinking, I need to follow that guy in front of me's step or I'm going to get my legs blown off. And he talks about like people in the chaos getting run over by their own tanks and just like how awful that is. And I'm reading that and I'm just like, I think people need to read more not even anti-war stuff, read stuff of people who fought in wars, because the nationalism I've seen even from people on the left, I think it's primarily coming from Americans I follow. I'm just like, you're insane, like to celebrate this stuff. You're totally insane because this stuff is so horrific. And I don't know how many of you guys watched the Peter Jackson the World War One film he did where he like recolored World War One footage. And there's a good bit at the end where he has like the Germans talk with the British and they talk about like meeting and how normal it is and everything. And I've seen a lot of reports, a lot of Russians don't even want to fight in this conflict because it's, you know, they don't. And I read somewhere else as well, only 40% of Russians supported, as like sketchy as the polling is, 40% of Russians supported recognizing Eastern Ukrainian, like, you know, secession or whatever. But the support for the actual war in Ukraine is seriously low because they don't view Ukraine as like as a people, as like their massive like historical enemies and stuff like that. Anyway, so I was talking about the World War One thing, and then I remember there's a quote of a guy who went over the top, and he just talked about like he went over the top, and he said, "Some if you actually try to charge for the enemy, you'd die." And he says like you just jump in the hole, and like you try and survive. And it's like for me personally, it's like when I watch that, it just gets in my own head so much. I'm like, oh fuck, like I cannot even imagine being there. I physically cannot imagine being in Ukraine right now and being one of those soldiers. Like, can you even imagine like you've got to go out and fight like a really as your own modern military force, you've got to go out and fight another modern military force with like all these really, really sophisticated weapons, and like you have like artillery, airstrikes, all that stuff. I can't even imagine how fucking traumatic that is. And people celebrating all this stuff like it's a video game, and some of the coverage of it as well online is just so fucking disgusting. Like, it actually makes me sick. So I think some people need to. Obviously, I'm not talking to like virtually everyone in this chat. I think some people seriously need to think about like the reality of war, and like you know, if you read about conflicts that are more like less black and white, let's say, okay, this one's black and white, but let's say like World War One, for example, in a lot of ways, where you just have, as Lenin said, you have millions of young men ordered by privileged like bourgeoisie, aristocracy, going to kill each other for capitalism. Like that's literally what World War One was. Like millions of people butchering each other for capitalism. And you can argue like, oh, you know, Germans marginally worse than the British and French. You know, they invaded different countries, Austria-Hungary, worse maybe. But then you get down to like the individual soldiers in this time fighting for these countries, and you're just like, it's just fucked up. Like if you read about every side that fought in that conflict, it's just like so fucking brutal. So it's like the thought that like this would be happening in my lifetime, and I'm gonna be start being like, oh fuck yeah, like 3,000 Russians dead. I'm really pleased with that. Like, oh yeah, sunflower seed emojis. Let's meme the shit out of these Russians being killed by the Ukrainians. Instead of like many soldiers would tell you, especially the World War II generation. I've spoken on my channel. You can go look at it. I've spoken to a guy who shot down kamikaze planes as part of the British Navy. I could not get. He's clearly so still traumatized by that. The detail he describes it in is so minuscule because I know he don't want to talk about it. And this is a guy who fought Japanese fascists and shot down literal kamikaze fighters who were going to suicide bomb themselves into his ship where him and all his friends are stationed, right? So I think people just need to like look for more accounts, like personal accounts of war, before you start celebrating all this shit, because war can be a necessity sometimes, and like this war, it is necessary. Like I support. I don't want Ukraine to just roll over, and it's necessary. Just like World War II was necessary, but at the same time, necessity doesn't mean you should glorify war, and I think that's just a problem we've had. And I wrote my master's thesis on the first Gulf War. I talked about it last time. That was the first war that had 24/7 cable news coverage, and they turned it into like a movie. Like I read like so much stuff on it. It's just that's the start of like treating war like a movie and a video game. Like Vietnam was different because the press wasn't tightly controlled, but the Gulf War, the army tightly controlled the press because they didn't want another Vietnam. And then you had CNN and Fox running these stories just to glorify this conflict. And I think it's really gotten into a lot of people's brains where this, like I saw a live stream the other day, people were waiting for an aerial bombardment in Ukraine, and they're all like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Like this is just the sickest shit. And like I said, it's just depressing on top of everything, just like how people just don't think about the like personal human situation of this stuff. And I understand it because we don't. So for example, I don't personally like to do that with the Nazis, for example, because the Nazi war crimes are so often very, very personal and so widespread. Like it's literally the way they conducted the war was just like a series of brutal war crimes. Like it literally was a race war for the Germans. They believed it was a race war. So I don't give them a pass. But like with things like this Russia stuff, where you see like children, essentially children, 19-year-old soldiers crying, like Ukrainian generals saying captured ones are like calling their parents who don't even know where they are and stuff like that. Yeah, I want Ukraine to win as decisively as possible. I'm hoping the sanctions on Russia, I'd love an ideal situation, the situation to cripple Putin so much he has to step down, because even then, like the Russian economy is totally tanking, and at the end of the day, who's going to suffer most of that? Like it is something you have to do to cripple the war effort, but who's going to suffer most of the sanctions? It's not Putin and the oligarchs. It's going to be Russian civilians have been fucked over by an awful economy over the last 30 years. So like I think the whole situation is not something to take pleasure in at all for anyone. And I think you can recognize the necessity of like a war and a defense. It's the same way I feel about the IRA and stuff. Like my relatives were in like the original IRA and stuff. And I think it's like 1916 Easter Rising. I think like what they did was necessary. I'm pretty sure well, most of them died, but I'm pretty sure like they wouldn't be celebrating it, like celebrating the killing later on, because people who do that shit don't normally like love doing it or celebrate it. And a lot of people, you can read as well, a lot of people in the IRA who killed civilians, like feel completely awful about it, right? But then they felt like this was then necessary way to fight back against British imperialism and stuff. But these people like don't often like doing it. I'm sure a lot of those Ukrainians soldiers fighting at the moment, I'm sure that there's a lot of like camaraderie and adrenaline right now. But of course, in 20 years' time, 10 years' time, there's going to be loads of Ukrainian veterans who are completely traumatized by the war, and not even just from what they've seen happen to their side, from what they've done as well. It's just like a natural thing that happens, no matter what you've done. And this happened in World War II a ton, didn't it? Like they're fighting like a good fight. and they're killing Nazis and stuff like that. A lot of them completely traumatized for the rest of their lives, and that's just like that's what the reality of war is. Like these people have to do it sometimes, but I'm not going to glorify it and be like, oh yeah, glory to Ukraine, like fucking kill those Russians and all this shit, because like I just find it really morbid and I find it really gross. And as someone who's like anti-war and wants war to be like the literal last resort, and obviously like that's what Ukrainians wanted as well. They didn't want this war. The war was forced on them. But at the same time, I'm not going to glorify it. And I've been pretty disgusted by a lot of supposed leftists who are treating this like some sort of fucking video game or like Marvel movie. Yeah, Jordan's saying, I know a shit ton of Ukrainians, Poles, and Russians who are pissed because they see each other as brothers. This is why people are blaming Putin and not Russia. Yeah, I saw a Ukrainian boxer, and he was saying this shit about Ukraine and Russia as well. Like he was like, I want the conflict to end between us because like we're so similar. So I'm reading more stuff. Sorry, people are fighting in the chat. Sorry, I thought people were talking to me. Yeah, so being B saying this is something I dislike people talking about Ukraine right now like it's a game, but it's not. It's life and death situation that will cause trauma for centuries on either side. Okay, read some more stuff. Yeah, Neville. I actually tweeted this the other day. Actually, so Neville saying, "Cav, do you extend what I've been saying about soldiers to U.S. soldiers who fought in Vietnam and were drafted?" Just wondering, based on what you said about the Vietnam War movies earlier. So this is a good point. So I made the point the other day. If you can accept that US conscripts in Vietnam weren't all monstrous murderers frothing at the mouth to commit war crimes on civilians, you can accept that not all Russian soldiers want to be there and want to kill Ukrainians and want to do war crimes. And that's my main point. If you can accept that not everyone who fought in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan was an evil, irredeemable piece of shit, very like bloodthirsty and everything like that, you can accept that. And Vietnam's an even better example because they were conscripted and a lot of black soldiers especially killed their commanders because they didn't want to fight in the war. And it's called fragging. They used to throw grenades under their bed and stuff. All right, so you guys are all fighting in the chat. Okay, you're all fighting about Vosh for some reason. I don't even think we spoke about him. All right, take some more comments. Deer Hunter. Okay, don't watch The Deer Hunter if you want a good insight into war. Deer Hunter is racist as hell and is like so inaccurate as well. Oliver Stone said it's inaccurate and he fought in Vietnam. What if you want a good insight into Vietnam? I mean, from a very, very American centric point of view, watch Platoon. Like I'd say that's probably the best one from an American point of view, even though it totally minimizes the Vietnamese. Don't watch The Deer Hunter. It's just like a complete racist caricature of the Vietnamese who all like films like The Deer Hunter kind of like retroactively justify war because it makes the enemies look so bad, when in reality the Americans were the bad guys, not the Vietnamese. It's the same with shit like American Sniper and like The Hurt Locker. They make the Iraq War look justified by the way they depict it. Apocalypse Now is fine. I wouldn't say it's a great. Full Metal Jacket's a good one actually. Deer Hunter is Western propaganda. Yeah. Yeah, don't watch Deer Hunter. Yeah, don't watch Rambo 2 even. Jarhead is good. Jarhead is a good one actually. That's in the first Gulf War. Jarhead was boring. No, I like Jarhead. The it's not meant to have action. That's the point, isn't it? I haven't watched Generation Kill. Born on the 4th of July is pretty good. The book's better though. Hamburger Hill I haven't seen. Not Casualties of War is pretty brutal with Michael J. Fox. That's a good one too. Yeah, someone saying Black Hawk Down. I mean, I haven't seen it since I've been older, so I could definitely see how that could be interpreted being like racist as hell. But yeah, um, yeah. Someone saying Platoon is good but doesn't show the Vietnamese enough. You rarely or not see the faces of the Viet Cong soldiers. Yeah, that is definitely it. We Were Soldiers is a good movie, but yeah, We Were Soldiers surprisingly is a decent enough movie because at least humanizes the Vietnamese side. Obviously, still very American centric, but actually pretty good as well. Um, so much more stuff. Yeah, locals have to be savages. Yeah, it's like Resident Evil 5 as well. Is there anything else I wanted to cover? So this is the stuff people were talking about. What you guys were saying, they didn't want to like they weren't letting in people across the border. So Nigerian medical student at Poland Ukraine border told me she's been waiting 7 hours to cross. Says she's border guards are stopping black people and sending them to the back of the queue, saying you have to let Ukrainians through first. Someone else saying Indian students were also stopped from crossing over to Poland, even though the Indian embassy in Poland had already arranged for those students to be taken on a flight back to India. And there's some like video evidence of that. So that's been like pretty widespread. It's pretty shitty to be honest. And there's other videos of Ukrainians like soldiers or I don't know what they are, like pulling like non-white people off a train and stopping them from coming on. um I don't know if I talk about this. So basically I spoke about this the other day. So there's a problem. I think the one thing I'm a bit uncomfortable with, right? So the Azov shit is like massively overblown. Like, I'm totally happy to admit that Azov shit is overblown, but I don't think the Azov shit is the only thing to be concerned about. So I don't know if you guys remember that story in Ukraine, in Canada, where there's monuments to the SS and insurgent groups who fought for the Nazis in World War II, and this is one of them. This is like I think it's like the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, and he's standing with a guy holding this flag. Now, this is an insurgent flag, Ukrainian insurgent army who helped do the Holocaust. And I was talking about this yesterday. Just like a small thing. I don't think this changes, obviously, like supporting Ukraine in the war, but like this is something they need to address, hopefully after they beat Russia. But like, so the problem with Nazism in Ukraine isn't that everyone is flocking to join Azov. It's that Nazism is often given a pass because of the Nazis fighting Russia. This goes all the way back to the 1930s. Tweeting Azov didn't win the elections and Zelensky is Jewish doesn't change that. So here's the point I want to make here. Nazis who fought the Soviets are officially honoured by the government. You can fly their flags on the government buildings. Some of these groups pledged loyalty to Hitler and did the Holocaust. On 10th of January 2008, Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko submitted a draft law on the official status of fighters for Ukraine's independence from the 20s to the 90s. Under the draft, persons who took part in political, guerrilla, underground, and combat activities for the freedom and independence of Ukraine from 1920 to 1919 are part of the following. We recognise as war veterans, Ukrainian Military Organization, OUN, UPA, Ukrainian Main Liberation Army. And like, that's why you see shit like this is so common. And like Rob makes a good point. You can believe, as I do, Putin is cynically weaponizing the very real and documented fascist ties of the Ukrainian nationalist movement to justify this invasion. But that doesn't mean we should just whitewash this stuff or pretend it doesn't exist. Yeah, that's the problem. Like, if you try and have a bit of nuance, it's like people are saying, "Oh, you support Putin and stuff," but like, am I seriously meant to see fascists, Nazis dipping bullets in pig's blood or pig's fat to shoot Muslim Russian soldiers with, and the Ukrainian National Guard tweeting that out like it's a good thing, and I'm meant to be comfortable with that. Like I'm meant to be comfortable with like fascism being promoted by the Ukrainian state, and that's the problem with this stuff. So talking about the Ukrainian insurgent army slaughtering and doing war crimes. So yeah, that's the nuance you have here, and that's the nuance. Obviously, like a lot of tanky, as you guys call them, tankies, like Jackson Hinkle was saying, like Putin is denazifying Russia. Yeah, Putin is not denazifying Russia. Putin is a fascist anyway. But like I said here, the problem is it's not everyone in Ukraine wants to go join Azov. It's that because Azov are fighting the Russians, people don't give a shit that they're Nazis. The same way with the Ukrainian insurgent army or the UPA, who literally pledged loyalty to Hitler and did the Holocaust, the government doesn't give a shit, like it shows here, honoring them as war veterans because they fought the Soviet Union or fought the Russians mainly. So that's the problem. Like that's why the blind nationalism makes me super uncomfortable, because it's like, okay, I'm saying glory to Ukraine. Why? While I'm not even going to show you this, but like, let me just show you. I'm not going to play the video. I'm going to show you the tweet. Azov fighters of the National Guard grease bullets with lard against the Kadyrov orcs. That's not the Azov Battalion's Twitter page. That's the Ukrainian National Guard. Right? Imagine the British National Guard having like neo-Nazis in it and being invaded by Russia and be like, oh yeah, the Oswald Mosley Battalion is dipping their bullets in pig's fat to shoot Chechens with. Isn't that good? Do you know what I mean? Like it's a problem that people like, because I've covered this for like a couple years now. I covered it way before the invasion, and how it's normalized in Ukraine and stuff. And this is a problem in Eastern Europe in general. This is not just Ukraine. This is like Russia. This is like obviously like Serbia and other places like that. It's a massive problem with normalizing actual Nazism, not just normalizing like not even far up, but like ultra conservative. It's like literal, like these people did the Holocaust and now we're waving their flags in our building stuff. Just take some more comments and I might end it soon. Sanji Boy saying, thanks so much, Sanji Boy, for the $20. Super appreciate it, man. To Chat and Cav, he probably already knows it, the Russian people can't get rid of Putin because he essentially has changed the constitution, pretty much making it so he doesn't leave. Yeah, the 8% vote margin is BS. Yeah, the thing is, Putin, he used to have to become prime minister and then become president, which he used to swap between. Like every 4 years, he'd become the prime minister, someone else become president. I'm pretty sure he's changed the constitution so he doesn't even have to do that now. So I'm reading some more stuff. Azov is gone. No, Azov is in the National Guard. They still have like some sort of autonomy. They wear their own emblem still. How did the police treat British people when they... Yeah, police beat up a lot of anti-fascist protesters back in the day. Am I doing a video on this? On Azov or on the war? I've done videos on Azov, and I did a video on Azov a year ago, and I did a video about Ukrainian fascists 2 years ago. So I'm just reading some more comments. Someone just flew the UPA flag in Dublin. Yeah, it's fucking shitty. Yeah, Moritz, that's what I was just showing you. All right, take some more comments and I think I'll end it. Free Palestine. Is there confirmation Azov is alive? Yeah, they're literally fighting in the war right now. Okay. Oh, also, people who love me trolling about From Software on on Twitter. I bought Elden Ring last night, and I've been playing it, and I actually like it. The thing is, okay, I'll end my stream with this hot take, right? Elden Ring is good. The hyperbole around it is fucking insane. Saying it's like the best game of all time, and it like reinvents open world gaming. Elden Ring is literally Dark Souls and Breath of the Wild mixed together. That's literally it. It's really like nothing unique at all. I'll find you an Elden Ring, Elden cringe, yeah. But it's a solid enough game, but it just reminds me of Dark Souls. Like I don't see the hype, to be honest. Like yeah, the open world is cool, but it's like Breath of the Wild. Like it's really nothing unique, to be honest. Yeah, the reviews are just crazy. Like 10 out of 10. Like, are you fucking serious? And essentially, like another part of it is it feels so fucking old as well. Like it really, they need to put some more money into new animations and stuff. The hottest take of the stream. Yeah, like, we've been talking about like literally like the most controversial shit like humans can talk about, but the most the most controversial opinion is me like thinking Elden Ring is massively overrated. Thanks so much, dude, for the $2 just to fund your Elden Ring purchase. um, okay, just got some nice racists in here saying glory to Ukraine. And see, this is the problem, right? So I said my problem with glory to Ukraine. He's saying glory to Ukraine, death to the orcs. So he's obviously referring to the Chechens and stuff. Stay mad, Cav. Israel uses the point to just okay. I don't know what you guys talk about. Limbo, I haven't seen that, but that obviously is like weird as hell. Um, yeah, Andrew, the point with Elden Ring gets such a massive Dark Souls games get such a massive pass for reusing the same assets from everything and doing nothing new, where Ubisoft games get shit all over all the time. It's actually so crazy. What makes 10 out of 10 game? I don't know. Pushing the medium forward, like The Last of Us or Breath of the Wild or The Witcher, like offering something that is so like is like pretty revolutionary, I'd say. Yeah, Metro games are good. It's really boring. We do agree on everything now. All right, everyone. So I think I will wind down the stream there, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be covering this week. I'll say I've got a couple ideas for content. I'm going to cover the Ukraine stuff at some point. Um, but yeah, I've got other videos to make as well. Anyway, thanks so much all for tuning in. Really enjoyed it. Sorry these are only an hour long. One day when I get out to England, we're going to go for longer. And yeah, hopefully, I'm sure a lot of you. I'm sure I got like a fair few unsubscribes because I always do when I talk about straight up politics, but I don't really give a shit. But anyway, maybe stream on Thursday. I think maybe more about the Ukraine stuff and yeah, see you guys later and reach out on Twitter or Insta if you want to talk about anything.